time for another edition of Simply Stated. I'm going to go back to a few salient points from my show that I did last year, The Thought Project, just so you know, on YouTube, which had a pretty good following. I enjoy making Simply Stated because it's much smaller episodes. I've got more things I actually have to work on right now. It's the sound of a car in the background. And it's just easier than doing this sort of in-depth series where I'm doing this constant research. But also, I want people to actually take time to watch the original series and then view the snippets from this one along the way. I'm still building subscribers and the channel just keeps growing all the time. But this episode specifically refers back to a couple of interesting points from that show and some history that I want to note. As you probably saw yesterday in the news, even though it was Super Tuesday in the U.S., with Trump coming out, being Nikki Haley, whatever, you know, GOP contender, whatever. I think people already knew that's how that was going to go. But we do have to go back to a few salient points, I think, from when I was in Janesville, Wisconsin. Because part of the investigation was in the Washington, D.C. area, because I lived there for 19 years, was that Janesville made some mistakes and somehow was comparable to Dubuque, Iowa. That is completely incorrect. Janesville, Wisconsin never let literal submarines from Russia pull up and dock there and let Russians just simply get out and make free to live there. They never welcomed members of the Chinese CCP. And in fact, they put in Paul Ryan to the U.S. House before the markets completely crashed. Of course, Representative Paul Ryan went on to become one of the most influential speakers of the U.S. House and dealt with multiple threats from people who turned out later to be part of the old KGB out in Hollywood. Film directors, the fake friend agency I talked about, all of that. And, you know, I put all that out there for you because it's important to remember that this fight goes on in the U.S. all the time. Now let's talk about some of the issues with Russia and their attitudes, because they never seem to quite grasp, or only started to grasp, that the U.S. is very international and very libertarian. And they let other countries and other countries' militaries come over here all the time, which once you realize that is kind of scary, because it seems like this closed borders country, and it's really not. They really do just let people roll up here and stay and hang out for a while. Now there's a point to that that's kind of tough, which is that they do it to collect intel. So what people don't really realize about the U.S. is that they trade a lot of intel. One of the businesses of the U.S. is intel, period. When our ships roll up in other countries or work with English or Australia on operations, we're very much seen as an international country. It's almost like some weird configuration of internationals came together and formed a country. And at times, it's hard to know which group of internationals or even what country is really running the U.S. And it's actually a struggle that continues all the time. Obviously, the U.S. has made a solid turn back towards what I covered in the Thought Project, just so you know, which is that, of course, the country was originally settled by the English, French. And obviously, Russia had a big part of the country and had to be pushed out. And then began to try to reassert themselves with their populations in the U.S. by using them to found the F.B.I. and the C.I.A. originally to support them and their marriage agreements. Remember the crazy conversations I told you about where I was dealing with bizarre people from Russia, or even Russian citizens in the U.S. or Russian Americans saying, why do you demand sex from people, demanding they be paid for it? We're demanding people sleep with their spouse and they be paid for it. It's weird stuff that no other country practices and nobody wants to be involved in. Just a bizarre type of harassment of citizens. A weird form of rape happens in the U.S. What I want to get back to with Janesville, Wisconsin is that there were two things that happened there you kind of have to keep in mind today. One was the woman that I had been friends with who was on the POM squad at Janesville Parker. And she was bizarrely way too supportive of Crystal Eggy's mother. Crystal Eggy's a real person, I'm not using an alias, who was killed. And there were a lot of telling statements she made, like she really emphasized Crystal's mom being upset about it, never getting over it. Every single investigator I ever talked to said that it was a complete lie, that she was far too sympathetic and focused on the mom, too busy covering up for the mom, because the mom eventually turned out to be guilty. Two, she was nasty to me and said that I was just supposed to be a prostitute and I didn't have a right to live in a nice home. Totally sympathetic to KGB couple that had taken me from my parents as a kid And we're still trying to hold on to me, which is a big no-no, you would think, in the U.S., right? 3 claimed she was going to become a psychologist and continue to abuse children and groom them to be trafficked for the KGB, now known as the F.B.I. out of Russia, right? Then I dealt with another man who originally the story that Russians tried to use, the old KGB tried to use to cover up the situation, was that he's supposed to have married me and Janesville wasn't together enough to support us getting married. It's not true. Never had any interest in that. Here's another dork member of the old KGB, which knows the FSB of Russia today. Never true. And the other lie was that he got recommendations from the man I nicknamed Wilhelm to join the U.S. military. Not true. He ended up going to work for Booz Allen Hamilton, the big fake front company that actually only does projects for Russia and China and has military operations in the U.S. So you better watch out. Think quick. Because sometimes the people you think are in the U.S. military are not. And you have to remember that. And remember that you know that about them. And remember that you're in a country that's very international. So where did Janesville actually fail with either of those 2 people? Well, they didn't. Because they got them both reported up to the higher levels. I will say, with the woman that I dealt with, who did actually become a psychologist, I think, I certainly hope the University of Wisconsin took away whatever degrees they gave her. I think she only got as far as a master's in psychology. But she certainly, her social work, she didn't belong in that. Now she's openly talking about trafficking kids. She got reported. I had a horrible time trying to get paid for the work that I had done, but she absolutely got reported. And she got herself put in an actual congressional report as somebody who had actively married a man in the U.S. military and who was responsible for the problems at Abu Ghraib. So she was essentially responsible for a number of misbehaviors and felt like she was better than me in that role. She got a big head because she thought she was marrying a military man. Today, I would question you and challenge you to ask yourself if the guy she married was even actually in the U.S. military. Because I've seen enough and researched enough to know that some of these people who claim they're going to the U.S. military turn out to be working for another one. And they didn't go to the U.S. military at all. And I don't believe Facebook profiles necessarily reflect reality. So, keep all that in mind, because getting reported meant, unfortunately, what she'd always said, which is that she'd be able to go back to the KGB and the FSB out of Russia and say that she had done her job, she had proved her loyalty to them. So that's the problem with just reporting someone and not actually meting out a punishment. So I hope Wisconsin's actually taking care of it today. I figure they probably have by now. I doubt she's actually working with kids. 2, I think they might still need to rush whether or not her husband is actually working as a cop or has even really ever been in the U.S. military. Because what he engaged in abroad was a pretty big violation of U.S. standards. Simply violating, well, whatever. The point is, you can't just blame the wife, right? But when I go back to in the show, without Project Just, you know, sometimes it's the smallest things. The fact that she was so nasty to me, so supportive of Cersei and Wilhelm and trying to traffic me, having stolen me, being rude about my life and talking down to people and got such a big head so fast. The fact that she talked the way she did about Crystal Legge's mother was all indicative of who she really was. Sometimes it's the little things that count. And I don't doubt for a minute that Janesville, Wisconsin ever got any of that wrong. Because she doesn't live there today. And the other guy ended up having to leave the state altogether and move down to Missouri, which Missouri is a state, you gotta know this, very, very affable, as the old saying goes, to the old KGB. All the stuff I told you about with Mark Twain and the Mississippi River, which is all back in that show. That's why I made such an in-depth show with so much material. So anyways, I think the point being about the U.S. is that we're very much a country that lets different countries sort of roll in. I mean, I'm by a base now where I've been told everybody from Australia to Russia rolls through here at times, and which is amazing. But you have to know that about the U.S. You really do. And Russia, frankly, gets confused a lot and assumes simply because we let some people visit or come through that somehow they own it or have rights over all of us, that any of it actually matters. By the way, my song You, which actually made it fairly far in the LMG Global Music Competition, was about the guy. And then asked the way he talked to me and how nasty he got when he thought he was getting his military position, and then just turned out to be another dork going to work for Booz Allen Hamilton. Just another dork working for the Russian Mafia here in the U.S. Just another dork for the CCP. That's all. And a company that's been devalued to, what, 10 million? And their only actual specialty is just stealing from U.S. citizens. So I challenge people to keep focused on what really matters. Don't believe the hype. Don't get into the ridiculousness with candidates. And, you know, there's no way around it. But, you know, sometimes I just look back at some people I've known who are really decent and I say, God bless. That's all I can do. That's all I can say. Have a good one.